Chapter 5. Tokyo Part 2. In a moment of panic and absurdity, Chris let out a startled scream, surprising himself as much as he likely did the unknown newcomer. He quickly zipped up and spun around, only to find a regular attendee who had just entered the restroom, staring back at him in confusion and surprise. The man, startled by Chris's scream, nervously chuckled and moved past him to a stall, leaving Chris in a mix of relief and embarrassment. Realizing how ridiculous he must have looked, Chris couldn't help but laugh at himself. He quickly washed his hands and composed himself, shaking his head at his overreaction. After their heartwarming and reflective lunch, the women made their way to the onsen in a serene and picturesque part of Tokyo. The anticipation grew as they approached the exclusive spa retreat, known for its luxurious amenities and private hot spring baths. Upon arrival, they were greeted by the tranquil ambience of the onsen. The entrance was adorned with traditional Japanese decor, blending elegance with a sense of calm. The staff, dressed in tasteful kimonos, welcomed them with warm smiles and guided them through the beautifully landscaped grounds. The onsen was a haven of relaxation, with its natural hot spring baths set against a backdrop of lush greenery and gently flowing water features. The women were shown to their private changing area, where they slipped into comfortable yukatas provided by the onsen. In the peaceful setting of the spa's dressing room, Anteriel, Tara, and Michelle were briefly alone, surrounded by an air of quiet tension that contrasted sharply with the serene surroundings. Michelle broke the uneasy silence, her voice low and laced with worry. "I've been trying to forget what happened at the club, but it's always there, at the back of my mind." Nodding in agreement, Anteriel looked around nervously before responding. "It's been the same for me. I keep thinking about the what-ifs, and it's terrifying. We crossed a line." Sharing in the unease, Tara added calmly, "We made a pact to never talk about it, but it's hard. It feels like we're carrying this heavy burden, and I don't know how long we can keep this up." Michelle's voice broke through, fraught with desperation. "What if we just call the police and confess? I can't live with this guilt anymore. We killed somebody. No, you killed somebody, Anteriel." The words hung in the air, with the potential to shatter their fragile silence. Anteriel and Tara reacted instantly, their expressions a mix of shock and fear. Tara moved closer to Michelle, her voice urgent but soothing, trying to soothe her without triggering a breakdown. "Michelle, we can't do that. Think about the consequences. We need to stay calm and think this through rationally." Anteriel, equally alarmed, joined in, gently placing her hand on Michelle's shoulder in an attempt to ground her. "Listen, I know you're scared. We all are. But confessing isn't the solution. We have to stick together on this. Let's breathe and keep our heads clear." Anteriel's calming words were suddenly interrupted by a cell phone ringing inside the dressing room. The three women froze, their conversation ceasing abruptly. They exchanged quick, worried glances, the sudden noise heightening their anxiety. Who was it? Did they overhear anything? These questions hung in the air, unspoken but palpably urgent. Before they could react further, they heard footsteps moving away swiftly, and by the time they rushed to the doorway to see who it was, the spectator had already exited. Back inside the dressing room, a sense of urgency enveloped them. "It could have been Kim, Olivia, or Kesey," Michelle whispered, her voice laced with anxiety. The thought that one of their friends might have heard their confession added a new layer of tension to the already fraught situation. Tara, trying to think strategically, suggested, "We can't jump to conclusions. Let's watch them and see if they act differently." Before they could further discuss their predicament, a spa employee entered the room, her presence bringing a momentary distraction from their turmoil. "Ladies, are you ready for your spa activities?" she asked with a professional smile. Realizing they needed to maintain their composure, Anteriel quickly responded, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Yes, we're ready. Thank you." As they prepared to leave the dressing room, Anteriel turned to Tara and Michelle, her expression serious. "Let's keep cool and walk out like nothing happened. We can't afford to raise any more suspicions." As they followed the employee out of the dressing room, each woman was acutely aware of the lingering uncertainty. The possibility that someone knew their dark secret added a new layer of apprehension to their day, but they carried on hoping for some kind of peace. They began their onsen experience with a visit to the indoor baths. The interior was elegantly designed, with stone and wood elements creating a harmonious, natural setting. After their time in the baths, they were treated to various spa services, including massages and facial treatments using traditional Japanese techniques and natural products. The experience was indulgent, leaving them feeling pampered and cared for. As the onsen experience ended, the women gathered, feeling relaxed and rejuvenated. They shared a sense of gratitude for the experience and bond they shared as friends. Upon arriving at the hotel, they were greeted by the men who had just returned from the anime and technology showcase. The men carried bags of souvenirs, an eclectic mix of gadgets, anime memorabilia, and unique Japanese trinkets they had picked up from the showcase. The women shared their own stories from the onsen, describing the serene environment and the luxurious treatments. The excitement and energy in the lobby were contagious, with each group member eager to share their day's experiences. With little time to spare, the group quickly freshened up in their rooms and then regrouped in the hotel lobby, ready for their next adventure, go-karting through the streets of Tokyo. The anticipation built as they made their way to the go-kart station. Upon arrival, they were greeted by a fleet of colorful go-karts, each waiting to be claimed for their nighttime adventure through the city. Mario and Anterial, riding side by side, led the way with a sense of adventure and confidence. They easily navigated the bustling streets, their carts gliding smoothly through the traffic, ideally in sync. Tara and Chris followed closely, their camaraderie evident in their playful rivalry. They darted through the city, each trying to outmaneuver the other, their laughter ringing into the night. Olivia and Alex riding together shared moments of joy and excitement. The thrill of the ride brought them closer as they experienced the beauty of Tokyo's neon-lit streets together. Kesey and Ladarius, a dynamic duo, competed playfully, challenging each other with small races and quick turns. Their friendly competition added a layer of fun to the journey as they weaved through the city. Jason and Michelle, riding side by side, took a slightly more relaxed approach, absorbing the sights and sounds of Tokyo. They pointed out landmarks to each other, enjoying the city's unique blend of tradition and modernity. Emmanuel and Kim, a pair of seasoned travelers, enjoyed the ride with awe and appreciation. Together, they cruised along Tokyo Bay, the view of the Rainbow Bridge, creating a picturesque backdrop for their memorable journey. The group passed through iconic areas like Shibuya Crossing, where they felt the pulse of the city's heart, and Harajuku, where their colorful carts fit right in with the eclectic vibe. In Akihabara, they were immersed in a world where technology and pop culture intersected in dazzling displays. After an hour of thrilling exploration, the group reconvened at the go-kart station, their hearts racing from the excitement. Climbing out of their carts, they shared a sense of achievement and exhilaration. After returning to the hotel from their exhilarating go-kart adventure in Tokyo, the group gathered briefly in the lobby. The excitement of the day was evident in their tired but contented expressions. With a collective sense of satisfaction from the day's experiences, they exchanged simple nods and smiles. "Good night, everyone," they said almost in unison, the camaraderie of the day resonating in those two words. Without lingering, they parted ways, each heading to their respective rooms for a well-earned rest, ready for the individual adventures the next day would bring. The following day, Emmanuel and Kim are at breakfast in the hotel's dining area, chatting excitedly about the day ahead. The topic of discussion was their upcoming activity, a private helicopter tour over Tokyo, promising breathtaking aerial views of the city. As they discussed the details of the helicopter tour, Emmanuel's phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID and stood up, excusing himself with a brief "I need to take this" before stepping outside to answer the call. Kim, watching Emmanuel leave, felt a flicker of curiosity and unease. She wondered about the nature of Emmanuel's private calls, her thoughts momentarily drifting away from the group's enthusiastic conversation about the aerial adventure that awaited them. As the group enjoyed their breakfast, Tara and Michelle were deep in conversation, discussing their plans for the evening. "I found out about this private kabuki theater performance. It's a traditional Japanese art form, and we get to experience it up close." As the morning unfolded, Olivia and Alex were engaged in their discussion, planning a cultural excursion. "I was thinking we could do a private art gallery tour," Olivia suggested, her interest in art evident in her tone. At another table, Kesey and Ladarius were finalizing their plans for the day. "How about horseback riding?" Kesey proposed, with a sense of adventure. "We could ride through the countryside, or maybe even along a beach." Nearby, Mario and Anterial were discussing an exciting plan for their day. "What do you think about a hot air balloon ride?" Mario asked, his eyes gleaming with the idea of an aerial adventure. Later in the day, Chris and Jason found themselves wandering into the hotel lobby, only to realize that the rest of the group had already left for their respective adventures. The lobby was quiet, a stark contrast to the morning's buzz of excitement. Chris looked around the space, a bit surprised. "Looks like we're the last ones here," he remarked, a slight chuckle in his voice. Jason, his mind returning to the previous night's escapade, had a sudden spark of inspiration. "Hey, remember that crazy-looking nightclub we saw while go-karting last night? What if we check it out tonight?" "That could be fun. A night out in Tokyo, why not? Let's do it," he agreed, imagining the vibrant nightlife and the unique experience it would offer. Chris and Jason set out into Tokyo's vibrant night, seeking the nightclub they had glimpsed during their go-kart race. The city thrummed with energy, a stark contrast to the disillusionment they felt upon entering the club. Determined to find something more exclusive, they began asking around. Approaching a couple of attractive women and a bartender, they inquired, "Know where the High Rollers Club is around here?" Their question was met with suspicious glances. "You guys cops or something?" one of the women asked, her tone cautious. The atmosphere tensed as they assured her and the others that they were just tourists looking for a real Tokyo experience. Their persistence paid off. A well-dressed, mysterious gentleman overheard their conversation. He approached them with a sly smile. "Looking for the High Rollers Club, are you? I can take you there, for a fee." Unbeknownst to Chris, this man was connected to the very group of gangsters he owed money to. After a brief cash exchange, the man led Chris and Jason through a series of alleys, further away from the neon buzz of the main streets. The route was convoluted, adding to the sense of entering a hidden world. They arrived at an unassuming door. The man knocked in a specific rhythm, and the door opened to reveal a luxurious underground club, buzzing with an elite crowd, high-stakes games, and an air of exclusivity. As they stepped inside, the realization of where they were hit them. This was no ordinary club. It was a playground for the wealthy and connected, starkly contrasting to the club they had initially entered. The club's centerpiece was a sumo wrestling match in progress. A ring surrounded by a cheering, high-end crowd, the powerful clash of the sumo wrestlers added an intense and thrilling atmosphere to the club. Chris's attention was quickly drawn to a poker game happening in a quieter corner of the club. The stakes were high, and the players around the table had the serious, focused demeanor of seasoned gamblers. Intrigued by the challenge, Chris felt an irresistible pull towards the game. The thrill of the gamble, combined with the club's charged atmosphere, was exactly the kind of diversion he sought. As Chris sat down at the poker table, he was momentarily oblivious to the potential dangers of gambling in such a high-stakes environment, especially given his unresolved debts. Jason, finding himself captivated by the intriguing woman, decided to adopt a more daring persona to pique her interest. "I'm actually in Tokyo on a confidential business deal," he began, his voice lowered to imply secrecy. "I work in international trade." The woman's eyes narrowed with a mix of intrigue and caution. "Sounds risky," she replied, her interest piqued by the hint of danger in his words. Jason, encouraged by her reaction, leaned into the role. "It can be, but that's the thrill of it. Navigating the shadowy side of global commerce," he added, embellishing his tale with mentions of covert meetings and high-stake negotiations. Unbeknownst to them, the mysterious gentleman who had led them to the club was watching from a distance. He was subtly gauging Chris's involvement in the game, a calculating look in his eyes. Jason, captivated by the mysterious woman's charm, was led through the club's lavish interior. Her confidence and allure were intoxicating, and he followed, mesmerized by her presence. They navigated through the buzzing crowd, their path illuminated by the soft ambient lighting of the club. Reaching a secluded private room, she gestured for him to enter. The room was elegantly furnished, exuding a sense of exclusivity and intimacy. As the door closed behind them, the sounds of the club faded into a distant hum, creating an isolated world for just the two of them. "I hope you're enjoying your evening," she began, her voice taking on a more businesslike tone. "I should mention, though, that my company comes at a price." Jason, taken aback by the sudden change in the conversation, realized the situation he had unwittingly walked into. He realized that her interest was part of her services and found himself in a delicate and unexpected predicament. Chris, sitting at the high-stakes poker table, was in his element. The cards seemed to be in his favor, and his stack of chips grew with each hand. He maintained a calm exterior, but inside, he was riding a wave of exhilaration. This was the thrill he sought, the rush of gambling, and luck was on his side tonight. However, his winning streak didn't sit well with the other players. These were seasoned gamblers, their faces hardened by countless nights spent in similar dimly lit rooms, and they weren't used to losing. Murmurs of discontent started to ripple around the table, and accusatory glances were thrown in Chris's direction. "You're cheating!" The game came to a tense halt as all eyes turned to Chris. Before Chris could defend himself, the mysterious man who had led him and Jason to the club stepped forward. His presence commanded attention, and the room fell into an uneasy silence. "I think it's time we had a chat," the man said, his tone deceptively calm. With an air of authority, the mysterious man gestured for Chris to follow him. They moved to a secluded area by a set of grand double doors, away from the prying eyes and ears of the poker table. The man's demeanor was calm, but an underlying intensity made Chris increasingly uneasy. Once they were alone, the man began. "Earlier tonight, I received a call and a photo from America. It was about someone owing a substantial debt, someone who hadn't paid up walking around freely in my club, asking about underground spots. Imagine my surprise when I realized that someone was you." Chris felt a chill run down his spine as he remembered the sensation of being watched back at the anime convention. It wasn't just paranoia. Someone had been keeping tabs on him. His mind raced as he tried to piece together how deeply he had been tracked. "You've got some nerve, Chris," the man continued, his voice low but firm. "Did you think you wouldn't be found out?" "I knew something was off," Chris admitted, his voice steady despite the anxiety mounting within him. "I felt like I was being watched. I should have been more cautious." The man eyed Chris with a mixture of disdain and curiosity. "You're in deep, and not just with the poker game. We need to settle your debt, Chris. And it's not just about the money anymore. It's about the principle. Look, I've been trying to get the funds together. It's not that easy," he said, his voice tinged with desperation. The excuse sounded weak even to his ears. The man listened, unimpressed, his expression hardening. Before he could respond, a waiter carrying a tray of drinks walked through the double doors. Seizing the moment, Chris acted on instinct. With a swift movement, he knocked the tray from the waiter's hands, creating a clattering distraction. Using the chaos to his advantage, Chris bolted. He dashed through the club, weaving between tables and patrons, the sounds of the overturned tray and startled shouts echoing behind him. His heart pounded as he desperately sought an exit, but the club seemed like a labyrinth designed to disorient. Behind him, the man's goons sprang into action, swiftly pursuing Chris through the crowded club. The chase was intense, with Chris narrowly dodging clubgoers and furniture, his pursuers close on his heels. As he neared what he hoped was an exit, Chris's path was abruptly blocked by two more hulking figures. In a split second, a bag was thrown over his head, plunging him into darkness. His arms were grabbed. The sounds of the club faded into a muffled hum as Chris struggled against his captors. Adrenaline surged through his body, but it was no match for the strength of the men who held him. The goons navigated through hidden corridors of the club, taking Chris to an undisclosed location within the establishment. His heart raced with fear and uncertainty, the gravity of his situation becoming painfully clear. He was no longer just a man trying to escape a debt. He was now a captive in a high-stakes game of power and control in the underbelly of Tokyo's nightlife. Meanwhile, Jason, though initially shocked by the steep prices quoted by the woman, decided to go along with it. His heart raced with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. As he started to undress, the woman excused herself to enter the bathroom, her phone in hand. Jason caught up in the moment and didn't think much of it. Moments later, there was a heavy knock on the door. Before Jason could react, two stern-looking men entered the room, and it was clear they were not part of the club's regular security. "Which boss are you working for?" one of the men demanded, his voice gruff. They looked at Jason expectantly, clearly under the impression he was someone involved in their underworld dealings. It dawned on him that the woman had set him up, likely informing these men about his supposed business. Realizing he was trapped in his web of lies, Jason tried to maintain his composure. "There's been a misunderstanding," he started, but his voice faltered under their intimidating gaze. The men weren't buying it. "We don't tolerate liars or imposters," the other man said menacingly. "You're going to tell us everything, or you'll regret it." Caught in a dire situation, Jason scrambled to react. Standing in his leopard print undergarments, his shirt discarded, he realized he had to move swiftly. His heart pounding, Jason grabbed his belongings and bolted towards the door. his only thought to escape the dangerous predicament he had unwittingly landed himself in. The men, realizing Jason was attempting to flee, shouted and gave chase, their heavy footsteps echoing down the corridor. Jason's plan to escape the treacherous situation unraveled rapidly. His path was abruptly blocked as he dashed the door, trying to make his way out in his leopard print undergarments and hastily donned pants. The goons, momentarily thrown off by his sudden movement, quickly regained their composure and intercepted him. In a swift motion, one of the goons grabbed Jason, his grip iron tight. Jason struggled, trying to break free, but another goon joined in, overpowering him with ease. The chaotic sounds of the club seemed to fade into the background as Jason realized his escape attempt had failed. Before he could protest further, a bag was roughly pulled over his head, plunging him into darkness. Disoriented and overpowered, Jason felt himself being dragged away, his heart pounding against his chest in panic. The muffled sounds of the club's nightlife were after what seemed like an eternity. Jason was unceremoniously shoved into a room, and the bag was yanked off his head. The heavy door creaked open, and a man who commanded respect and fear in equal measure stepped into the dimly lit room. He was the boss, his presence alone intensifying the already tense atmosphere. Chris and Jason tensed up as he approached, his gaze sharp and assessing. "You owe us $5 million, Chris," the boss began, his voice calm but laced with an undercurrent of menace. "We've been more than patient with you, but our generosity has limits." Jason, still trying to process the situation, looked on in disbelief. The sum mentioned was astronomical, and the realization of Chris's deep involvement with these dangerous individuals was alarming. Turning his attention to Jason, the boss continued, "We know you're no arms dealer, but you entered the club with Chris. You see, we can't have witnesses complicating things." Panic surged through Jason. "Wait, hold on. He is not my friend. I barely know the guy." Sensing their approach, Jason instinctively tried to back away, his instincts screaming for him to escape the dangerous situation. However, his efforts were quickly subdued by the overpowering strength of the goons. With a swift and practiced movement, one of the goons grabbed Jason's arm, pulling him toward the table. Jason resisted, his body tensing in a futile attempt to break free, but another goon swiftly joined in. Jason's struggle was quickly quelled as the goons maneuvered his arms onto the table with a surprising subtlety in their strength. They were careful yet firm, ensuring no sudden movements could disrupt the boss's ominous demonstration. The boss eyed Jason coldly, considering his plea. The room was thick with tension, both Chris and Jason's fates hanging in the balance. The boss, exuding an aura of control and danger, pulled up a chair and sat across from Chris and Jason. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, his eyes never leaving theirs. The room fell into a tense silence, with only the faint sounds of the club in the background. "You see," he began in a measured tone, "debts need to be settled in our business. It's not just about the money, it's about respect, about maintaining order." His gaze was fixed on Chris, who sat motionless, his expression grim. The boss continued, "When someone can't pay up, we must take alternative measures. It's nothing personal. It's about sending a message, ensuring that our terms are not taken lightly." Jason, sitting beside Chris, felt a cold dread settle in. He glanced at Chris, whose face was etched with regret and resignation. The gravity of their situation was becoming painfully clear. The boss paused, letting his words sink in. "There are ways to work off a debt, of course," he said, his tone implying that these methods were far from pleasant. "But let's be clear, they come at a cost." Sensing the dire nature of the situation, Chris finally spoke up, his voice tinged with desperation. "Hey man, can we talk about this? I can get you your money, it just slipped my mind," he pleaded, trying to convey sincerity and urgency. The boss paused, his expression unreadable as he considered their pleas. The room was thick with tension. After a moment that felt like an eternity, the boss gave a subtle nod. Instantly, his goons sprang into action. One grabbed Chris's left arm, forcefully pinning it down to the table. Chris winced at the rough handling, his face contorting in pain and shock. "Tell me, Chris, which fingers do you value the least? Because it's time to make a painful choice, and choose wisely." Jason watched in horror, realizing the situation escalated beyond what he had feared. The boss's methods were ruthless, and it was clear he was not a man to be reasoned with. As one of the goons presented a sharp, expensive-looking blade to the boss, the tension in the room surged to new heights. The boss accepted the blade with a chilling sense of ease, the steel glinting ominously under the dim lights. Chris desperately pleaded, his eyes fixed on the weapon. "Please, I need all my fingers. Don't do this." His voice trembled with fear, betraying his desperate attempt to avoid the inevitable. The boss admired the blade before turning his cold gaze back to Chris. "You know, in our world, we believe in making lasting impressions," he said with a menacing calm. "And nothing leaves a mark like taking something someone can't grow back." In the tense atmosphere of the room, Chris braced himself for the worst. A deep sense of dread filled him as he saw the boss's hand rise in the air with the blade. He closed his eyes tightly, steeling himself for the excruciating pain he anticipated. "This is it," he thought. "I can't believe it's ending like this. The pain is going to be unbearable." But then, there was a sickening thud as the blade hit the table, and to his shock, Chris felt nothing. Chris's eyes lifted slowly, his heart pounding, as the horrific sight of his friend's severed hand on the table came into view. Time seemed to stop, the room fading into a tense, eerie silence at the brink of this unthinkable reality. Well, what an explosive chapter that was. You've just listened to another twist in the dark tale of We Hit. If your heart's racing and you're craving more, you know what to do. Smash that like button and hit subscribe. Things are about to get even bloodier, more deceitful, and thrilling. So stay with us and brace yourselves for the next chapter.